I'm going to call the meeting to order. I want to do a couple things before we go to comments from the public. First, Patrick has to leave at 7:30, so I would like to move approval of the teacher contract up to right after the consent agenda, since we need a quorum to approve that. So is there any objection? Okay. Second, since I was unexpectedly unable to attend the last meeting, there was no public thank you done for Kim Kudreski. I think that's how you say her name. So even though she's not here tonight, I do want to publicly thank her for taking minutes for us for, I don't know, 2.5 years maybe. And I did deliver a hanging plant basket and a thank you card to her on June 14th from the board. So I just want you to know that.
Thank you.
All right.
And minutes tonight, Martha?
Minutes tonight. Patrick will do the minutes, and I think he's enlisted Keely. Is that what I heard?
Thank you very much.
Charging my computer.
He's enlisted Keely to fill in after he has to leave for the select board meeting. I did check, and as long as you don't take action, it is acceptable to continue to meet without a quorum, which is what we'll have to do tonight.
With Brendan here, do we still have a quorum?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, we will still have a quorum. That's right. Okay, good. So disregard that. Take action to our heart's content. Okay. So comments from the public on items not on the agenda. Hi, do you have a comment? If you can stand, maybe if you, I guess
Sit at that end of the table?
Or over there?
you can get her. Okay, so if you could identify yourself for the record and then make your comment.
Yeah, so standing here is good.
That's fine.
Okay. I'm Eliza Kuchuk. I'm the Director of Youth Engagement at Essex Chips. And I was invited here by Kim to talk about our mentoring program. We have a lot of exciting, well, I guess one big exciting thing happening for this upcoming fall. We're expanding. We've been in Essex Town schools for a while, and we are now expanding to all 4 through 8 schools in the school district. And we're really excited. And to that end, we need a lot of help getting mentors so that we have enough people. So Kim suggested talking to you all and also just putting the word out. If you know anyone, I have little promotional things I can pass around. But essentially, it's an hour a week, and I match pairs based off of common interests and just really like common interest, personality, and to make sure that they are going to have a lot of fun together. And it is for adult volunteers to students. And mentoring has really been proven through the National Mentoring Partnership to change lives. It can increase resiliency, school engagement, be a protective factor in risky behavior. And we've also had the conversation along with the social emotional piece that I know has been the focus at EWSD, that it really just ties in very nicely to that, because it is all about the students and really increasing their well-being and giving them more options for the future, really. Are there any questions? Yeah?
Is the idea that you get a 4th grader and then you're with them for 4 years, or can you say like I like mentoring 8th graders, or?
It's both, really. If someone has a preference on age, we can match them that way. mentoring, to see the most impact, it's a multi-year relationship, and actually we also just started, Kim's our first one, to have mentor pairs continue on to the high school, but it's community based, so it's more through CHIPS than the school district, but there is the option to continue through high school, which is really exciting because they still need someone in high school. Yeah.
Is this through the school year, or is it beyond the school year, like school vacations, summer?
It is only during the school year, except for when they get to the high school, then it's outside of school.
Okay.
So it's throughout the year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
I would give my,
Yeah.
Laura and I have been together since 3rd grade. And she's a 9th grader, which is pretty cool. But I always have said throughout the process, it was like one of the most relaxing hours of the week, because you're not a teacher, you're not a parent, you're really a friend. And she was super crafty, and I'm not that crafty, so I grew and learned in a lot of different ways. And we did lots of walks and hikes, because I like that. And so it just has been fun learning and growing with her. And sometimes we would share lunch with her friends at middle school lunch. The cafeteria is pretty awesome. But then we would have the rest of the time that was ours, just ours. So that 1 hour a week that's on a school schedule is really manageable in a different way than, our time together now is not every week. And it's usually a little more time together, but not every week. It's just a little bit harder to manage it outside of a school schedule, where a school schedule aligned really well with my family and my kids and their needs, so that 1 hour was available. So if you're an employer and you can imagine that working, we've got, I think Dylan in the picture is a mentor, Lorna's a mentor, Johanna, so we have a bunch of district employees.
Founders is
Yeah.
actually like another IA wants to become mentors, so there have been a few staff,
Yeah.
like school staff people as well.
Yeah, and an employer with proximity or a person with some flexibility in their schedule. It's really awesome if you can think of recent retirees that might have an interest. It can really work, and Eliza does an amazing job supporting the training and the needs of the mentees and the mentors. So we're fortunate for that and excited to see it expanding, and especially as you think, Martha, about maybe Westford outreach. And so thank you all for thinking about it. Thank you, Eliza, for sharing the good news and the pitch for adult support.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll take the extra ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just have one more question. Do mentors have to go through background checks?
Yes. So there is an intensive screening process. So there's an application, interview, background checks, all the school requirements for volunteers. So they go through everyone, and a training as well.
And does the person applying have to pay for the background check?
No, we reimburse it.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions, Patrick?
If you're free, in about 20 minutes, there's also a select board and trustees joint meeting that actually would probably have a good number of people, some of whom might be interested as well, so.
Where is that?
I think it's actually at Lincoln Hall, because I think that it's a trustee meeting first. So Lincoln Hall, they start at, right next to Brownell Library. So might be worth checking out if you're in the area and don't have anything to do. The next 10 minutes.
Are there additional ones, or? Because I was thinking of reaching out to them, but I didn't know how actually.
Yeah, for sure. As it turns out, yeah. If you want, you can certainly shoot me an email. But yeah, we meet 3 times a month, so
Okay.
we could absolutely have you come in and give your pitch. I'm sure, honestly, everyone there would love to hear it.
Yeah, that would be really great.
Yeah.
Can I get your
Yes,
email?
I will.
I can ask Kim or.
No, I'll
Okay.
rip off a piece of paper and hand it to you. Let me finish signing these.
Write it on. Yeah, don't rip one of the words.
That starts at 7 tonight. So.
I might head home, but a little later.
Okay,
But yeah, that'd be really great if I could attend in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
Good. Anything else? All right, thank you for
Thank you.
coming in. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. I'm going to pull the approve leave request from the consent agenda because there is no request. Is there anything else that anyone wants to pull from the consent agenda? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion that we approve the consent agenda consisting of school board minutes from June 4th, approval of warrants, approval of the tax anticipation note service, and approval of a release of contract for middle school science teacher at EMS, Teresa Schroeder.
I'll make the motion.
Thanks, Andre. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Okay, and as I said, we are now going to move ratification of the master agreement with the Teachers Education Association up to be the next item on the agenda.
About that, just a point of
Yes.
order. So circulating around shortly will be the documentation related to the tax anticipation note, and there's a mark on where people sign. So if we just have that completed by the end of the meeting, would be great.
Okay. All right. So, Beth, are you gonna
Kim could
Sure.
take it.
And then please jump in wherever, Andre and Brendan and Beth. There were no, honestly, major changes as I was trying to write the joint statement about the settlement. There was some cleanup that happened from the last contract. The unified contract, generally, there were no substantive changes that happened over this 2-year period. Some minor cleanup issues. The health benefits remain the same in this 1-year agreement that was sort of statutorily dictated to us, that the agreement would last for a year, and then in theory we're going to have the health insurance benefit statewide negotiated and outside of the contract. So we'll see what happens with that. But healthcare remained the same, and the total new money was $3.25. The process itself, I believe, again, would be universally felt to have been respectful and collaborative, and an opportunity to listen to the things that have changed. There's been a lot of change in what happens when you unify and in what happens when you try and make changes and early releases. And we did hear a variety of experiences around that from various age groups, and it was an opportunity to listen, but largely that was what allowed for things to be heard and responded to, mostly outside of there being any actual article change that came as a result of it. So I think appropriately so. But I continue to appreciate the process and the shared respect with our teachers union, and despite the fact we went to mediation, our mediator complimented us on it having been one of the most positive mediations that he's had experienced. In our teacher mediation, it was relatively quick. We knew we had very little left on the table, so that we kind of knew would lead it to a quicker conclusion. But just, I think the goodwill and the exchanging of handshakes and hugs on the closure of the process, and an exchange of commentary that, yep, it'd be great, let's do a joint statement. And it doesn't mean we aren't all working hard to protect the interests of taxpayers and the interest of students and the interest of our teachers. It just means I think we've done it well in that we trust one another and respect each other. And everybody's learning from the process, so I feel grateful.
You can make a motion, and then I'll put it up for discussion.
Sure. I would like to move that we ratify the new master agreement for our Teachers Association to include an new money increase of 3.25%, total new money, and continuation of health benefits and other articles with modifications as indicated in the master agreement.
Okay.
Something like
Great.
that.
I think we should put the year for 2019.
2019, 2020, thank you. 1-year agreement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you, are you getting all that, Patrick?
2019, 2020.
2020.
Right. Okay, I'll open it up for discussion, if there is any. Okay, if not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. All right. Congratulations, yes,
Great
that's.
job.
job.
There is going to be a change in leadership with the teachers union. Jess Pisaris will be stepping down, and we're grateful for her years of leadership. And Pete Picard, who's been co-leading on negotiations, will be stepping into co-leadership with Jen Letourneau. So again, grateful to all of them for their leadership. I think Jess will remain in a leadership position within their organization, but outside of president. So.
Okay, so we'll now move to the heart of tonight's agenda, which is reporting on student performance. And I will turn it over to Beth and Amy and Erin, I assume. So you were sent a lot of data, and hopefully you
A lot
have
of
some
data.
good questions ready.
So we do have a lot of data, and it is something, the ones that you had requested to look at. We are going to try to hold it to a time limit, even though we have about an hour and 45 minutes, but we looked at it, and Amy and I have broken it down into a time frame. Unless you want to look at all the data, and is there something that you would rather take a deep dive in to tonight instead of looking at all of it? So that was our question right up. Yeah, if we go, so there's the 5 areas that we want to look at. What we thought is that we would spend 15 minutes on the first 3, and then 20 minutes on the annual snapshot and 20 minutes on the equity survey. Those are both newer. Unless there's one that you just want to say, no, we really want to take a deep dive on this, and this is on our list to continue at another time.
We did leave wiggle room between each one to answer questions, and then some room at the end to be able to say what else, but I know that sometimes we get into it and then we get a little bit deeper into one and then we don't get to the other one. So we wanted to put this in front of you to say fairly tonight, what is it that you, I guess, value the most right now?
And we can always come back
I
to
was
it
gonna
too.
say, I think that would always also be reasonable if we didn't feel like we had done as much as we wanted in any one area to put it on an agenda item for August. Keely.
I was just gonna say that of the first 3 and the first 15 minutes, I'm most interested in hearing about the student discipline data, again, because that's something that we haven't really talked about in the past.
Okay.
But other people may have other feelings, so.
I kind of had questions spattered throughout all 5 of them, so.
All right. Well, how about if we go through it and we'll see where we get stuck, and if we have a lot of questions or want to get deeper, we'll take it at that point and then say we'll put it on another agenda, or we'll go deep. We'll be flexible.
You have a hard copy of this in front of you. You should have been sent an electronic copy, and I want to acknowledge that there's a couple of graphs where, the font was pretty tiny about the percents. So I did print out a hard copy of those graphs. So when we get there, if you're saying, I can't see that number or can't hear it, Beth can reach over and hand those to you. This is just, I guess, for you to read, but just to acknowledge, our state assessment system has changed, and we've been adding state assessments, and that's an important context to understand. So we are on our, fourth, I should know this, year of SBAC for ELA and math. We implemented the Vermont Science Assessment last year as a pilot and didn't get results, but it did appear in an algorithm in our school accountability system. So I'll talk a little bit about that when you see the annual report card, but we don't actually have detailed data on that just yet. We did just implement the real version of it this year. So we are expecting to get more detailed information this fall. So that won't appear in great detail for you tonight, but that's something that we want to be able to look at and be able to come back to you. That you
We
all
will
will
come
like
back
to
to you.
come back and look at. Sorry. In the fall, to look at those results. They're anticipating maybe August we'll see them, so it's just something that we'll keep an eye on. You'll keep an eye on. And then likewise, we piloted the Vermont Physical Assessment fitnessgram last year with no results. This year we do have, we have the student results, but we don't have the whole group results to present to you. We'll get that again in August. And then we have this new school climate survey that we don't know a ton about right now. It's called VT Climb. It's anticipated to be able to provide school climate information through a survey for students in grades 5, 6, 7, and 10. That was their choice at the Agency of Ed, and then all instructional and non-instructional staff in all schools. So we talked the last time I was here about some potential, that could be some data points for some of those measurable outcomes that we have. We haven't seen the questions just yet. That would be implemented next spring, and then you would see the results after that. So that's another interesting one to kind of keep an eye on. Okay, so our results just in. So the way that the SBAC results work, I know there was a question about the timing of the release. So for those of you who've been on the board for a long time, if you remember, state assessments used to show up in a box. There was a 2-week window. We would send it off, it would come back, we would get the results. We'd have to verify them for about 2 weeks, and then boom, it would go live and everybody would get it at once. It's a little bit different with SBAC in that it's a 3-month window. Kids go on and they take the test, and then within 10 days you get that student's results back. So what they said was June 14th, you're allowed to tell people what your results are, assuming they're all in. Ours weren't, so we still had some makeups. As of today, we're feeling pretty solid, although we do have a couple kids missing in a couple grade levels, but we're feeling with the numbers, the size of the district that we have, that these are our whole group percentages. What we don't have access to right now is state data. We don't have access to other school districts' data, and we don't have access to that disaggregated data just yet. Throughout later in the fall, or later in the summer and the fall, those pieces start to come in. So right now, this is our whole group data mixed across. This is our annual, how we did. And then one of the ways we look at it, we can look at how did 3rd grade do, and then we can look at how did that crew do over time. Again, kids move in and out a little bit, but this is what we currently have access to, and it is literally fresh off the press. We think I've got maybe our last student in this morning. I have to double check on that. We don't have yet, actually this is just another way to look at it. So if you look at 3rd grade, sort of this was the trend for how we did in 3rd grade, or the 3rd grade assessment. 4th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. And if you remember 9th grade, we used to give tests back in 11th grade, so we only have 2 years of 9th grade data. These are our math results. Kind of similar, we had kind of that low first year, then a hiatus up here for 3rd grade, 9th grade, 2 years of 9th grade. And then you'll just see years where you say to yourself, is that a cohort that kind of went through? Is there something interesting here? What we do is we provide it to the principals. They do a similar thing where they look at those cohorts across, they look at them across this way. They look at them against their local assessment data to see, yeah, that kind of matches what we were seeing locally, or no, that doesn't feel like it fits. But this information is so fresh, the principals have not had a whole lot of time to engage in it. Um,
either affirming
You know, we
us
have-
or
I'll go back
from the
here.
Previous year, you were watching it, and that remains a concern or seems to have improved.
For a long time, we were told, keep an eye on third grade and sixth grade math, that those were areas where there were big bump ups in rigor in terms of Common Core. So if you were implementing Common Core in math, that we were warned in advance, third grade and sixth grade, you're gonna, I see a little bit of a dip there. And I think we were starting to early on, and what makes me feel good is I feel like it's starting to level out a little bit. We're pretty steady in third grade right here, and we're pretty steady in sixth grade there. Obviously, we'd like to see the numbers even higher. Typically, we do much better than the state, but that doesn't feel like that's enough information for us. We do pretty well, or we do very well actually, in reading and writing. So when we get the breakdown of each of these, we look at that trend over time and we look at it against F&P. I'm not really answering your question very well. We're still in the wondering stage because it literally has just closed out. We have some cohorts that obviously sort of struggle, and you can sort of watch that cohort go through. We do this, by the way, for each of the individual schools, so there's much more sensitivity to those numbers, and they can see more closely some cohorts that are coming through that they may need to put some more intervention in place. And some of the principals have begun to make those decisions. I know Kevin is kind of altering his intervention program a little bit to try to be more team-based. Some of those decisions have been based on some early results as the principals are starting to see them come through.
Keely?
I guess I was just gonna ask, like, what sort of, like, to me, looking at the next set of charts, the ones about math in particular.
Yep.
Like, it looks to me like of all the subjects and grades assessed, grade 5 and 6 math are routinely lower on average than everything else. So, does this data provide enough confidence to decide we need to make interventions on how we're delivering grade 5 and 6 math? Or is it actually, this is put together from like, one school does really well one year and another does poorly and then they swap the next year? Like, I know we have pretty small numbers to draw statistical conclusions.
Yeah, sometimes an interesting phenomenon around 5th and 6th grade is that these are students who've not had Common Core since kindergarten. In other words, we're not there yet, whereas the younger crew has had more consistent instruction in that. If we think about programs that we're using, the former CCSU schools began bridges, and those students would now be getting closer to this grade, whereas Essex Town just began that.
So what you're saying is you anticipate seeing an improvement in grades 5 and 6 starting 2 years from now?
I think what we want to do is watch cohorts that have had consistent instruction towards the same set of standards and consistent materials before shifting those things too quickly. I will say, though, our principals sit with this data, identify the students who are not doing well, and they're not saying, gosh, those are kids who are not getting it, we'll just hold on to the next cohort. That's how the interventions are built for those students. I think you have a shift in program language right
Yes.
here. That's kind of interesting to me. A lot of math programs, not just ours, are K through 5, and then you move into a middle school program.
They
That's
also
a shift.
switch schools
I was gonna
then.
say, we've got a building change right here. So this tends to lead to more questions than anything else. The other piece that I struggle with SBAC math, their summative results do not come back by content strands, whereas in ELA they do. So in other words, I can see how the kids are doing reading, writing, speaking, listening, and research. This one is communicating, reasoning, problem solving. So it doesn't give you that, we're kind of low on geography. So it's limiting in terms of, or geography, geometry. So it's limiting in terms of giving us that kind of curriculum detail, which is why we have a local assessment that we put in place to try to get at that a little bit more closely.
Patrick?
If you go back one slide,
Yep.
there was one cohort in particular I just kind of wanted to point out and get an example of. Like, I'm sure you were mentioning, the principals sit down, but this one in particular, the 2016, starting in mathematics in grade 3, which is a very significant slide year after year after year. I mean, I don't even need to recall my college statistics courses to know that that's very statistically significant.
It is.
So in a case like that, where clearly there's been a slide for, the previous 2 years, and, I'm not sure if any change has seemed to take an impact. It doesn't look like it does because of 2019, dropped another 3 percentage points from 2018. What would you do in a case like that where there's, clearly a significant drop in one cohort in particular? Sitting down with the principals, I understand, but like this looks like it's an overall issue and not just, maybe a couple of students who need, or maybe you would tell me maybe the data is that. Maybe it is severely impacted by a couple of students who have very serious problems with it. I'm trying to
No, these
get
are
me
large
at-
numbers, so these are district-wide, so the
Yeah.
first thing I would do is I would flip to the page that has the Westford School, the EJ schools, the Essex Town schools, and look at that more closely to see if there's a cohort, if that's a trend that's consistent across the schools, or is it something that's going on in a particular school, which isn't necessarily to say that it means there's anything going on in the curriculum or anything like that. It might be the amount of time that's being spent on it. It might be the materials that are there. It might be the local assessments, aren't in tune to it.
It would also be interesting to look at the statewide data in that same way to see if somehow the tests are covering more and more material that we're not teaching.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we're going to get the detail on the answers is when we look at multiple measures. And so this is the first year we've put in place a local assessment plan that everyone's giving the same assessments. And that gives the opportunity to be able to say, here are 2 data points in math. What's it telling us? Is it telling us 2 different things, or is it telling us the same thing? And it just gives more meat to that conversation. I know I'm not answering your question fully, but we do leave with more questions than answers, and then we get right into who are those kids. I'll give a great example. I sat with one principal last year, and we were looking at the students who were, yes, they had not met that proficiency, but they were on the high end of the 2s. So who were those kids? And 3 years from there, where were those kids? And what happened to those kids? And so when you can get to that specificity, thank you. Because what this doesn't tell you is how close they are. They could be close to the bottom of that, or they could be close to the top of that. This is such a general piece. So I tend to open drawers.
The other thing I noticed on this slide, that this year's 7th graders made incredible gains
Right here.
over 6th grade, both in English language arts and mathematics. So I was curious again, is that something about the test, or did something change about teaching? It's just an interesting observation.
I think the tighter we get around the curriculum, the tighter we get around using similar materials and using similar assessments, if we're still seeing these things, it reveals a whole lot more.
I have a few questions. Number one, is the SBAC data in Alpine?
It is always poured into Alpine the date that we know the last student set of results are in. And I'll check with Kim, I think as of today, our last student was in, and then we poured it.
Okay, and it's my understanding that the reason we don't have all of our disaggregated results is because the free and reduced information really isn't there yet.
The state, you probably have heard a number of times people talk about this state longitudinal data system they're doing. That's held us up for almost 2 years in getting this in a disaggregated form.
The reason,
We do have it in Alpine in disaggregated forms, and that we know who our free and reduced lunch students are. We can get you that, but not for this year's data, because it hadn't been put together yet.
well, the reason that is my understanding that the reason that is occurring is because they have to go back to the Department of Agriculture to get the students' names, IDs, and then they reload that back into their system. Well, we already have that information. So why can't Alpine reference that information, separate out those students, and give us an updated report?
We can. So, right
Let's-
now, as of, I think, tomorrow morning, these results will be poured into Alpine, and we can produce graphs. We were not able to get you this from a statewide point of view. We were
Okay.
not able to get the ones that the state has concurred and agreed with us that those are the right numbers.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
two other things that bother me about all of this. Both the state and administration here, if the data isn't all complete, then we don't want to show that. That I understand. But as long as it's less than what's quoted as statistical significance, 6%, and those results are still outstanding, if it's less than 6%, it would be nice to have these results 3 months ago and at least start taking a closer look at what's going on.
They didn't
This-
even
this
take
was
the
just
test.
given.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
Just
Yeah.
got our last
Three
student
months
test in.
ago.
So if we
Oh.
had this board meeting next week and you said, I need to know 2019 and how the students did for free and reduced lunch,
Yeah.
I could give it to you.
Okay.
We just got the test results in.
okay.
Not even
They
sure we
just
got
took
that
it.
last student. It was
So we're not,
early.
we're not gonna be waiting for the state.
No, if
fully
you
dis-
needed that, we could get that for you out of Alpine. Keeping in mind that then if a state report comes out and says, and here's their free and reduced lunch numbers, they might be off because we report them differently.
Understood. We're looking for the bigger picture as to whether or not we're making progress. We do have some tools in,
Yes.
in the toolkit to provide that information to the board. Okay,
Yeah.
that's,
But it is stopping us, and we're now on year 2 of being able to say to you, how did we do against CVU? How did our students, how's our achievement gap doing
Right.
on CVU? But we can't provide that, and it's harder to provide it from a state level. In the past, we've been able to do that.
understood. I think the only other concern I had to do with grade 8 and 9. Those are greater than 6% in language arts and English language arts, and in math, grade 9. That is a bit of a drop.
Oh, yeah, this was a big drop. right here.
It's a very significant drop there. So I'd be looking for some additional feedback on those 3 areas specifically.
Me too.
I mean, it looks significant.
Yeah.
It does.
That's why I'd like to follow up with the free and, what was happening in the free and reduced area in those particular areas specifically.
Yeah. And I know we've had this conversation at the U46 board meeting. This is not excuse making, but we do wonder about motivation around state testing when you get to high school.
Understood.
It's one of the reasons that we're moving to the ACT for all students, so that
Right.
we can access that data, and hopefully it's an assessment that they'd be motivated to do well.
Yeah,
And then if we have a problem, if that makes any sense.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
We should move on.
How we doing? Am
We
I
should
in
move
half
on
an
to the
hour?
next one. Yeah.
Any other questions on this spec? Okay.
I'd say I'd
Let's
come back
move
and
on.
answer questions.
Well, we could visit you.
You
you
were.
know.
Yeah. I told her that. That's where the leadership retreat's gonna be.
Yeah. Okay, so just a quickie, it sounds like you guys were asking about star reading data. Star Reader, or Star Reading, we call it both. It's a web-based reading assessment, so there's some standardization to it. It's computer adaptive to a certain degree, so it's similar to SBAC. We began doing it at Essex High School here many years ago, and we were doing it 3 times a year in grade 9 and 10. We've backed down a little bit on that one. We feel like we've done it sort of frequently enough that we feel like we have enough information that we could back it down to twice a year. The middle school, ADL started doing it a few years ago, and then EMS just recently joined. So now we have middle school, high school, grades 6 through 10, some consistent data around this. We have feedback from students about motivation on this one, and whether or not they're feeling like it's a motivating assessment for them. But it's another data point for us, which is nice. So here's our Star Reader results. What this says, oh, and I have hard copy here if people want to see it, but I'll read to you. This is the 6th grade results, and this is across the district. And this is students who have not met and students who have met. So in this first iteration, and this was our first year of doing it for all 6th grade students across the entire district, including Westford, we had 69% met in 6th grade, met what Star Reader describes as the indicator that they feel the students would be meeting state proficiencies. 7th grade, 71%, 8th grade, 70%, so fairly consistent across. And then the next one I have for you breaks it down just a little bit more so you can kind of see the distribution of it. So these would be students who are below, these would be students who meet, and these would be students who exceed, and you can kind of see how that plays out. Another interesting data point on here is what we call the instructional reading level, which is a criterion-based piece rather than a norm-based piece. And essentially is saying what's the mean instructional level, this is a grade 7, for the students who are currently in grade 6. Students in grade 7, the mean instructional level is grade 8, 9, and then it's interesting that it levels out at 10 and 10.
Thank you. Sorry.
I was wondering why you use mean rather than median, because in 6th grade, for instance, if you have 1 student reading at a 12th grade level, you have 5 students reading at a 2nd grade level, and they would balance out. If I'm a teacher, I would want to know what's the point at which about half my students might have some challenge with this, and that would be the median.
I'd be happy to go in and find out if Star Rating produces that, but this is actually a data point that they produce. It isn't one that I constructed. So they have a series of like 9 data points that they'll put out there for you. And this one was mean, but I'll go back and look and see if median is an option to provide.
'Cause
I haven't
I would-
seen it on any
this
of
is-
other graphs.
This is just going to make people feel good. It's extremely likely to be masking serious issues.
Yeah, and that's why I think by and large, this helps us out.
That's too much.
What is helpful about that is the idea of classroom teacher would be able to see their students' instructional reading levels on a roster. It gives some information on an individual basis. So
Okay.
that's why we like looking at the IRL.
Could you just talk about for a moment, I realize these are incoming students.
These are our current 6th grade students.
Current students. Well, when you identify that 16%, for example, what sort of remedial work is actually scheduled to improve that performance? What actions does the district take?
I'm going to say we don't take action on single data points. We shouldn't take action on single data points.
Okay.
So when a student is coming into 6th grade and we see that they're scoring somewhere down here, and we see report cards coming in from 5th grade that they've been struggling, we see SBAC results that show that they've been struggling. So the interventionists and the teachers and the teams look at multiple data points and then say, this is a student who's been struggling for a while. However, I have walked into meetings some data meetings where they said, this student's been doing really well for a while on all these data points. I wonder why they didn't do well here. Let's kind of keep an eye on that. So there isn't sort of the triage immediately unless you see that consistent, something's going on, or you see multiple data points around it. And we have interventionists, Lori LaPlante, who work with some students. Sometimes it'll be a learning specialist, sometimes it'll be a team-based approach. But what I also see our teams sit down and say, boy, we've got a crew that's really struggling in this area, so we need to figure out what we're going to do in class a little bit differently. It is why we assess them multiple times too. So they'll be assessed 3 times that year to see if that number kind of holds some weight to it, if they're seeing something consistent.
Okay.
Anything else?
In high school, would it happen like in a particular class? Because 9th and 10th grade is English, right? It's not the other classes where you're like picking from a
We
menu.
pull, as you know, students are typically not in grade level classes at the high school, so our context is that we're able to get them out of 9th grade English class and we get them out of 10th grade English class. And we have other personnel come in and sort of grab groups and do them, or we bring them to the lab and then say, oh, we missed these kids. So it's a little bit of a all hands on deck to have students assessed. We were doing it, as I said, 3 times a year, both grades, and then said, okay, maybe we can back down a little bit to maybe twice a year. Now we feel like we've tested the test enough. You're smiling. Do you remember taking it?
Mm-hmm.
She was smiling quite a bit over there. Is there anything you want to add or say about it?
No, not really. But yeah. It was good. I think like one of the things, if there are any struggles on the students' end, I think is just boring would be the biggest one out of all, like the tests and quizzes you have to take like in regular class, and then having, like some students like the same questions every time.
Yeah.
And so I've heard from a lot of people that that's
The test
boring, I
isn't
guess,
varying
or
enough to
but-
give it multiple times.
exactly, yeah. So, but I also think that could be a good thing because it's kind of testing like your knowledge on the same question.
How would you compare it to your experience with SBAC? Not to put you on the spot.
But I think Star Reader is better than SBAC. I think it's a little bit like easier, but I don't know. I guess they're generally like the same.
Fun tests.
Okay. Ready? Yeah. Oh, there you go. Any questions?
We did that.
So this one, you're going to be disappointed in one slide, and that is for a reason. So we have something called Combined Incident Report, the ESSA software. So it's a Sears report, and it's a state data collection that's been in place for a bazillion years. It has certain categories in it that are always, they're state-required categories, but they are categories we struggle with a little bit in terms of calibrating what that means. I do have for you, if you're interested, the state definitions of what these mean, and our school leaders use those to report. Having said that, we know that we're not fully calibrated along some of these data points. We're in the middle of that data collection process right now for the current year, so this is a year behind. And this is our collated K-12 numbers. I wanted to share with you, and I put it on, and I put a link here in case you leave without the other ones. I wanted to share with you, because we are sort of confined to the definitions that the state give, and they're not always intuitive to the work that we're doing around things like restorative practices or positive behavior intervention systems. Dylan McNamara's been leading the collection of more more proactive data, I think. And we've been storing it in Alpine. We're new to doing this. We brought the schools on a bit at a time throughout the year, so it's not complete data, but I wanted to show you an example of the kind of stuff that we now have that we haven't had. So, for example, Dylan worked with our Alpine friends to create a minor and a major category, and he put them in words that made more sense and had more detail to them than the larger categories that were in SIRS. Like, was it defiance, disruption, destruct, property misuse, tardy, dress code, and language? So we're just getting this information in now, and again, not all of the schools are in full implementation of this. We're working towards that. Another example is the major problems and what those categories start to look like. Physical aggression was a big one. These are, again, one of the ones that we've reported in this system. Language, disrespect. Here's another example where we were looking at where is this occurring. Classroom, playground. Bus was smaller than people I think we're expecting to see.
Yeah.
Cafeteria may not surprise anybody. So this is beginning, we have some that are around motivation. What's the motivation that the student reported? And the one that was striking, I should have put this one on here, was attention of peers. That was like our longest one out there. So that's giving us more formative information to be able to work with students, and it's giving us a little bit more trend information, but we're new to collecting it in this way.
Question?
Mm-hmm.
All this data, is this reported, but it's not substantiated? It captures all?
What do you mean by is it reported?
Well, is there incidents that are reported but not proven?
State.
In other words, you could have,
I think it's proven.
I think this occurred.
well, you could have, you're accusing someone of alcohol sale or use.
Yeah, it would be the proven.
These are proven and not reported.
Particularly for those major ones, it would
The
be after
minor
an
ones
investigation.
They don't have to be proven. I mean, they're.
Okay, so it's somewhere reported but not necessarily upheld.
Right.
Okay.
And again, you can see the differences in the category. I mean, that's a interesting category right there, and it's collecting a lot of information in one, so that's why we really wanted to work on building a more local, you can almost view it as a local assessment system to be able to understand it a little bit better.
What's the difference between
Well-
assault, battery, maiming, and fighting? Let me tell you what it is.
I don't know.
It wasn't intuitively different.
I'm also going to
to me.
confess to you as the person standing up here, this is probably the data point I know the least about and am involved with the least. So these are the state categories that our registrars use to determine when to put a notch next to a kid's name. Can I give you a couple of them to hand down? Sure. So assault and robbery causing bodily injury.
Felony.
So the SIRS is,
Misdemeanors.
it's necessary for a lot of reasons. It gives good school information, but it's fairly incomplete in terms of our ability to be able to do something with it, which is why Dylan's been leading this project to get people on board to record it with more detail.
Martha, it looks like fighting is about mutual participation.
And even that, you can see how difficult that would be to calibrate around that. So was that mutual?
I actually had a related question. I think it's about who does these things and who is the victim of these things. So on this list, I'm assuming that these are all incidents conducted by students, not like burglary at Essex Elementary by random community members.
Yeah, this is students.
Okay. My other question for the more granular stuff that you have in Alpine, I have a hard time imagining what the difference is between disrespect and defiance. Is it that like defiance is against like a school employee and disrespect is against any member of the school community? Like, are these all things that, like, does it matter who you're doing it to, like another student or the teacher? Or?
So in August, up until August, our sort of only place to capture data and the way to capture it was Sears. when we rolled out Alpine and people saw how easy it was to put data in and to be able to build systems and reports, the leaders came together and worked with Dylan to be able to say, hey, could we do our behavior data? And I'm saying that because we're relatively new to that. They came up with these categories, they came up with their definitions, and I imagine they're gonna look at them and say, oh, maybe we could collapse those in some way. So they're still new to those terms themselves. These were not defined by the state.
I'm also impressed by how few tardies in this system and how few property damage in the official state reporting system. It's like not the school I went to.
I think it's just worth noting that a fair amount of the Alpine data are from the PBIS schools that have really identified what are their major and minor behaviors, created definitions for those, and are using Alpine to collect data. And Amy said earlier, not all of the schools are using this system yet with full implementation, and so it's really important to be careful about making meaning yet of the data. Typically, our tardies, for example, are placed into Power School through attendance. And so whether or not that's representative of how many tardies are or aren't in the system, we would really probably want to look at Power School to provide you
This is
that
likely
data.
tardy to class.
That's what I think. It's gonna
Yeah.
be to class, not to school.
Yeah.
And the PBIS schools, it's important to note, have an interest to be identifying at sort of a very granular level and with frequency, because that is the path to improvement of the overall school. So they want to get hundreds of data points for that purpose.
That's where the locations come from
Yes.
also through PBIS schools.
Okay, I've got Patrick, Laura, Andre, Brendan.
I'll try to make mine quick because I have to cut out in 5 minutes. But so that I can understand this maybe a little better, the number that's listed in Sears that gets reported to the state is clearly vastly lower than the number of records that we have, because there's 550 here, but in the previous data that gets reported to the state, there was like 80. So what sort of, I guess, what makes it rise to the level that we need to report it to the state versus an instance that clearly is happening here in the school but is not getting reported to the state?
Well, I mean, two things, and I'm going to give you an imperfect answer. So two things. One, this is 2017-18 official data collection. This is our current, we're in the year, what are we in? 18-19, and we wanted to understand what was going on in the schools, and the principals wanted to be able to record it. So they would likely put more records here around the smaller, I think to Keela's point, the smaller events, whereas this is sort of, as you said, reach the level of needing to report it to the state. What they have here is this definition and their best judgment against that definition. What we have here is a motivation internally to understand kids and what's going on with the trends. So I think to Aaron's point, you're probably going to see larger numbers, and it's not because we're trying to sort of flaw the system. This really is intended to be able to kind of support. What Alpine will do is produce a student report. So an individual student, you could be able to sit with a parent or a teacher and whatnot and kind of look at some trends. So you'd want to record more often.
Yeah, and I do understand that, and the number, I didn't expect what gets reported to the state is going to be anywhere near the comparison for the number of incidences, period. More what I'm looking for is there, you mentioned a judgment call. Is it a judgment call, or does the school district have its own set of, okay, if this happened, then
Procedures.
we need to go,
Right,
procedures,
That's what we're
thank
working
you.
on.
I mean, that's what I was just gonna say. We have some work to do, especially around cross-referencing the majors with the state reporting system.
Right.
Like that's future work, and I think Amy's slide said Dylan McNamara was really working on getting calibrated on these areas of data that there's work to do.
Yeah,
Here's
that
an
would be
example, the
something that-
definition of that from the state point of view will make you not want to put 500. I wouldn't want to be at a school where 500 of these things are occurring. Purposefully, knowingly, or recklessly attempting to cause serious bodily injury to another with a deadly weapon, unlawful medical or therapeutic impairment under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life.
Yeah,
That's when you put a check mark for assault.
Yeah.
the state report.
Certainly for here, it's more, my concern is not around the numbers for the reporting, but rather whether or not we have procedures in place so that people maybe aren't necessarily needing to make a judgment call. Because
need
once
to get
judgment
that.
calls get into place and individual school principals are making different judgment calls, that's concerning to me
Yeah.
versus, a set procedure.
And to be
across the
clear,
district.
this is designed to be able to support individual students and look for trends. This is actually not designed to be shared out publicly, because what we want to do is understand what's going on in our classrooms and our events.
Yeah, and I think as a board, that's what, we hear from, the public when we do our sessions, so a lot of people talked about bullying, or they talked about, so I wanna be able to say, it's not a judgment call, we have X, Y, Z in place.
Definitely have procedures for
Yeah.
bullying.
Yeah.
We're actually going to redo that again. And I'm thinking about what do we do for the public, for our parents around bullying, and what's the
Yeah.
definition of that? So
Well,
I'm working
that's-
through that.
Yeah, I'd just like to interject that a lot of people call behavior bullying, which does not meet the state definition of bullying. So I think that's something we need to keep
Educate
clarifying.
people. Yeah.
Laura?
Yeah, I was wondering on the first data point thing, on the harassment and assault, does that include sexual harassment, sexual assault, or no?
The Sears one,
Yeah.
honestly, I would have to look it up. I'm not responsible for reporting this, so I don't know the data quite as well. I'm sorry, what was the category?
Sexual assault is another category, it looks like, on the state definition.
Sexual harassment has its own category.
Okay, so it's
Sexual
not.
assault does,
Okay.
yeah. And
They're
sexual
just-
battery and
And
harassment.
what
Oh,
that
there's a
means
lot
is
of
if it's
categories.
not reported here, it means we didn't have an occasion, there was a zero number next to that particular category for that year.
All right, Andre, and
On
then
the slide, that, if you'll indulge me, the one that had the next one, please. Are some of these incidents a single act, multiple incidents that get reported? Because you could have a physical aggression, and it'd be hard to say that it wasn't disruptive and it wasn't defining. So, and the question I'm posing is, a single act could have multiple reporting.
Not clear, I'd have to go back and look at the referral form, I don't
it's probably
think so.
single, but-
I think they're single.
You could have an event that had multiple behaviors within it that show up in multiple categories, but in my experience, you wouldn't count, you would choose a behavior that you're counting, what is it? And you wouldn't count it twice.
Yeah.
So, in
Having
answer to
said
my-
that, this may be at 10 o'clock and this may be at 11 o'clock for a particular student.
True.
but you wouldn't take the event
Right.
at 10 o'clock
Right.
and
Give it
characterize
six
it
different
in
ways.
What would be the
certain
last
ways.
thing
From
that you
here.
noted?
I just noted that we moved on to
Where did the time come from? I guess I
data
lost
points,
on-
data presentation
When we're
for
talking about time here, just,
the reporting
these are just
instances.
number of
So the
incidents,
first
so
two
I'm not-
sessions I
Yeah,
wrote
right.
in my notes.
I think it was the student could have done something at 10 o'clock, been sent back in a separate incident at
Different-
11:30,
My question is
would be
more
characterized differently.
as a single
Or maybe.
incident. For example,
Right.
physical aggression could be
Yeah.
construed with bullying,
Yeah.
defiance, disruption.
And
Sounds
Aaron
like
is
no.
saying they have to choose.
Choose one of the. okay,
Primary.
All right.
Brenda?
Again, the reason that I wouldn't want us to spend a ton of time on these particular graphs is because we are really making up the system right now.
It's a proof of concept that may
Just
be
needed.
abandoned, or it may be reinforced, and it will certainly be clarified. But it was to try to put in the instructional hands the broadest amount of information that we have on the student to be able to then create the relationship that's gonna have that person be successful.
Brendan and then Kim.
Um,
And we're running out.
Yep, going back to the Sears, is that how you say it, Sears?
Yep.
Sears, I was surprised at how low the bullying number was, given that it was such a major component of our engagement session, and it shows up pretty dramatically in the equity survey. So my question is historically, does this report show that incidents of bullying are going down or are increasing over time?
I'm not gonna be able to answer that question based on this data point, because I was able to, keeping in mind that we grabbed data points across all schools across 2 former districts to try to get to this. This year we'll have, the first time we'll have it together. I didn't look for co-mingling former districts over time
Okay.
for this presentation.
Yep.
I think if that's a data point that you want, it's something we can get. I think keeping in mind that there is some calibration that we already know as school leaders that we need to do around these pieces.
Are there any demographic data captured with any of this so that it might illuminate higher incidence among particular groups?
I know we can or will be able to when we are fully implementing this. Would be able to get it out of Alpine. I'm not as familiar with Sears to know whether or not we get it. But we can record that as a question. Yeah, we'll
When
find
you
out.
report on the bullying incident or whatever, do you know, Erin, does it ask for, are they free and reduced lunch? Are they non-Caucasian, male, female, any of that?
I'm not sure the SIRS data set that you move into the state is the best place to do a lot of analysis around this. Our Power School data also serves as a source. Our Alpine data serves as a source. I do believe that they collect the demographics of the students on each of the events. I think we have some work to do around how will we analyze the data that we have going forward, given all of the transitions that we've made between student information systems, the assessment system, right, and over time, what is our plan? And I know that is that point that Amy was making earlier about the work we have to do. And also, to Amy's point about being able to watch a district over time, and we're a brand new district,
Right.
and in order to look at ourselves over time as separate districts requires a whole other body of work to try to get that out of old systems. And so going forward, we need a plan about monitoring. How do we want to monitor it? What do we want to do with subgroups? Which data points do we want to look at? Do we want to look at reports of bullying? Do we want to look at actual events found of bullying? There are some decisions to make to be able to report this out over time in the way that the questions are indicating interest, I think.
And I think we need to keep in mind too, when we did the public engagement, we had very low numbers of participants. And so, yes, they reported and said bullying, but that's when I say, I don't know if our public defines bullying the way the state is. That's why I think we need to do some educating to parents, and is it PTOs that we go to and educate, through that way. But I think we have, and every now and then that happens. We have to re-educate. And I plan on bringing Heather Lynn in, who does the state bullying and harassment trainings, to the leadership team again, and to calibrate. And then we could also, I would love to ask her if she could do the public one too.
Can I add too? I think it doesn't, I'm sorry, Brennan, it doesn't mean that a student who's being teased or a student who's being hurt isn't necessarily addressed. I think it's not reflected well in this data. We had 60 teachers attend 4 days of responsive classroom training last week because we know we have work to do in the classrooms. They know, they volunteered to attend the second 2 days of it because we know that we need to do some work within our classrooms to be able to do some proactive language teaching and relationship building within classrooms to reduce that. So obviously teachers are feeling it as well. But to your point, the word bullying is a little tricky.
Yeah, it is.
Brendan and then Kayla.
So I don't want to jump ahead, but I was struck by the fact that the equity survey showed that 50% of students agree that bullying is not a problem, and 40% of employees agree that bullying is not a problem. Does that mean that 60% of employees believe bullying is a problem?
Yes. Yes.
So I don't want to get, I think we should also not get hung up on definitions.
Yeah.
Because bullying could also be a concern
It's a
about
perception,
climate.
Yep.
So I just think that that's a red flag. Maybe it's not the official red flag,
Right.
but that's a red flag.
And we're going to talk about that when we go over those equity survey results. That was one of the things for me as I was looking across where are our areas in need of growth, and that was one of the pieces that came forward really clearly both across students and teachers and employees in reference to a concern going forward. And there is a difference between inappropriate behavior and bullying. And that is a real difference that when we're working around these issues, we run into a lot of confusion for a lot of different people on that. And so I don't know that it has to be one conversation or another. From my perspective, it's a both and not to dismiss the concern that shows up in the equity survey. Yeah.
Keely.
So yeah, just sort of to follow up on both Brendan and Kim's statements. I think that if we want to communicate with parents about bullying, the goal should not just be to define technically bullying. Penalties will only be levied if your student suffers this or your student does this. It has to be, we are taking these measures to make school a safe and welcoming place for your student. And like, here's how your family can support this effort.
Absolutely.
Like, not just like, sorry, you didn't get this handled the way you
Just
wanted.
missed the bar.
Tough. Like,
Well, and that there aren't rules like it has to be that if it's bullying, it's this result, and if it's not, it isn't.
well, I
You
mean,
know,
for
both are
harassment, there are
important.
some of those
Yeah.
distinctions in our school board policy and procedure. Like, and if it meets certain protected classes, but like calling somebody a baby repeatedly, which is the challenge my daughter is struggling with this week at camp, is like not technically bullying or harassment. It just makes everyone feel sad.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's a
Absolutely. And
barrier
that's
to a
what Amy
sense
was
of
talking
belonging
about.
and.
But there's not a barrier in addressing that. I guess that's my point.
Right.
Like, we can address that just as we can address bullying, and it's important that both are.
I think in many ways, we have more resources as a merged district than we had for,
Absolutely.
all the existing, these problems, this is 17, 18 data. The opinions were not some that said, in the last year, the switch was turned. This is an issue that, as a merged district, we can really put much more resources into a sense of belonging with an equity lens.
But I also wanted to follow up on Kim's question about demographics, because it doesn't matter how far back we go, we need to have that data available for the district that we are now, starting right from the beginning if possible. Because if we find that like every incident of physical aggression is a boy and every incident of dress code violation is a girl, that could mean that only boys are physically aggressive, or it could mean that our staff could have some training about how to identify behaviors without like a gender biased perspective.
Yeah. Okay, we are past our 15 minutes. I'll take one or two more questions.
I was just going to suggest it might be worthwhile to have this data broken out by grade. In my experience, the majority of the discipline issues are 9 to 12. In my experience, served on U46 board for years. So I think that it might help.
Think about that.
Yeah, and I guess I would recommend if you do schedule a time to do this, that we make sure that Dylan is here since he's led this project, and that there's some principles here, because they're very close to how these things get reported. They could definitely answer your questions better, I think.
Right.
So does the majority of the board think we should have another session on discipline data with Dylan and the principals?
Well, I think yes, but it sounds to me like we're just getting started with some of this Alpine monitoring.
That's
So
what I was gonna say.
I don't know if it's worth revisiting next month, but it's certainly something we should revisit next school year,
Right.
especially with all the work around things like SEL.
Or we could, when the new Sears data is in, and then look at at least 2 years, and then see how that's broken down into reports. I mean, that's something that we could look at in the fall, when we know the data's in.
Perhaps at the same time, Dylan could talk a little bit more about how you make the distinction between disrespect and defiance, for example, since we had some of those questions. All right, last question, Kim.
I was just going to suggest that I can't recall exactly when some of these other pieces of the annual snapshot, I know we're going to get to that, are going to be populated. But again, I think given the priorities being looked at in the snapshot, it would be shocking to imagine that that SIRS data or whatever version is going to populate some of this is not going to be broken down by demographics. It would have to be, I would think. Otherwise, we're not asking one of the more important questions as a state in terms of how we're doing on these matters and letting districts focus on it. So,
Well,
anyway, I don't know
no,
for sure,
there's-
but
Yeah, there's been a lot of emphasis in the legislature about looking
That's
at
right.
minority groups and
Yep.
people with disabilities and so forth in regard to discipline. So my guess is that there is some of that data. Okay, let's move on to
Good
me
transition,
and we'll snapshot.
Okay, I want to stop for a minute and ask you how much time you want to spend on this. 'Cause I want to do this justice. And let you go home tonight. Do you want to put a time on it? Are we doing 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
I think you can do the 20.
Yeah. All right.
yeah.
It's quarter
I
of
can
and we
speak
have until
quite
8:30.
So,
8:40,
I
right?
mean, it might be useful to ask if everyone got to review it before the
It's a good
meeting,
idea.
because there's things about like understanding the symbols that if we did review it, we probably don't need to hear it now.
yep,
Right.
But
that's
if
true.
we didn't review it, it would be necessary.
Right.
So did everyone get to
I
review?
reviewed it.
Yes.
I reviewed it, but I would be honest in saying that I wasn't completely positive which were generic and which were directly related to our results.
Yes.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
having looked at it, I still had some lack of clarity around our picture
Yep.
and what it meant.
And I think if I can give you sort of what I know about it, if you would like me to turn and go to the public site and pull up ours, when I was building this, because we wanted to get this due by the 19th, we had just come off of trainings on this. They hadn't fully gone live yet, so we weren't able to put those snapshots in there just
Yeah.
yet.
Might be good to
So
go to
we
the
are
site.
learning this. It literally just rolled out, but we had attended a training about a year or so ago where we had a forecast of the way this was going to be built. We've seen some changes since then. So if you hear me say, I'm not quite sure about that, it's because it really is just being rolled out. So this replaces No Child Left Behind's AYP. This is the annual snapshot that the Vermont Agency of Education created in response to, so the AYP system, the schools that were identified under Nickelby were following one school accountability system. The state of Vermont came up with a different, and were invited to come up with a whole other school accountability system under ESSA, and this is one of the tools that they've produced. So they took the ed quality standards. One of the things that ESSA does do, should I explain what ESSA is? You guys know what ESSA is. It's the newer version of No Child Left Behind. Every student succeeds act. It allows for more state control over the building of their school accountability systems. And so what they did is they went to their ed quality standards and said, well, these are the 5 key areas. So we want to give schools feedback on those 5 key areas that we in Vermont said we valued in the ed quality standards. The annual report right now only gives data and somewhat incomplete data for this one right here. This is phase 1, and there's still versions of this that are going to be coming out throughout the summer and the fall. They're working towards giving us data on this. Based on the training that I attended last week, I would say you're going to get a more complete picture in over a year from now, because they're still trying to figure out, much like we are around our measurable outcomes, what data point exactly can we get on that one. So here's what we've seen so far. Actually, these are their intended measures. Academic proficiency has 4 categories, and they're weighted. Picture a grade book, they're weighted. So this is worth a certain amount of weight, this is worth a certain amount, and so forth and so forth. So content standards, how are we doing in these areas? Right now they only have these data points and a little bit of this data point, and we'll get that one. How our English language learners are doing, and it's a growth model. How are our students doing in terms of their English language proficiency growth over time? So this is actually a very complicated algorithm. Our graduation rate, and then there's some college and career ready data points that they're beginning to collect. So for example, they'll move towards a system where they'll say, your school district, what percentage of your kids have met any one of these post-secondary outcomes? They did well on AP test, they did well on an ACT test, they did well in a dual enrollment course. So there's kind of some broad data points they're going to kind of collect around that and say, You may have done well on AP, you may have done well on ACT, you both sort of count as having met this one. This one they're making up just a little bit, so this is an intriguing one, I think,
What's
that
the
we'll see more of.
What's the assessment?
ACT, SAT, AP, so these would truly be test results. A student who does well on a test result that's pointing towards post-secondary.
Okay.
And this would be more like attending school or having an industry certificate. So it's a broad set of data that they're going to be collecting around this one, and they're not quite there yet. This one right here will be around, exactly as this describes, students that are participating in flexible pathways. There's going to be a test on that, There's going to be a question on that VT Climb about students and how they feel about their PLPs, so they'll put that in here. This one will have some questions for VT Climb. This is an interesting one that I imagine will come out of Sears. They're going to be looking at our staff and the stability, how long are they staying in our district, and what's our what's our turnover rate. This is going to be part of the VT Climb survey, the number of teachers that are licensed. Our staffing to student ratio, I think they were talking about a staffing to administrator ratio, expenses and so forth. So you can see where they're going with this one. Right now we have a piece of this. Does that make sense? So if you didn't understand it when you looked at it, it's because they really are kind of building, they're baking the cake a little bit as they're going along. But I like the way that it's wrapped around our egg quality standards.
Seems to be granular, very granular. I'm not sure how valuable it would be for a board member versus to a prospective new resident. I think it's too granular for, well, we'll see in a year,
Yeah.
right? Maybe.
Well, let me just show you. When you log on, their vision is that it will look like this when it's
I have
complete.
logged on.
That you'll say, so how are we doing on these particular things?
Right.
How are we doing over time on this particular thing? Are we
Right.
improving or not improving? And then this piece right here is, well, you might be doing okay sort of for the all students here for your current performance, but how are you doing on specific achievement gaps? They collapse some of those achievement gaps so that those subgroups, so they have one called historically marginalized versus historically privileged. So they group
Right.
together students of free and reduced lunch, ELL students, students with disabilities, and put them in larger categories. We have a lot of schools in Vermont that any one of those don't have enough N count to be able to produce it, so they created sort of these larger ones, but you can also go down to those smaller ones. And then they put some nice little icons next to it.
But they did lower the end counts.
They kept the same N counts that they will reveal publicly to not be less than 11, so you can't be 10 or less. But they did reduce pretty substantially the N counts to be looked at for accountability. They went from 40 to 25.
Yeah.
So those are our key metrics.
Mhm.
That's what that looks like. And yeah, we talked about the N counts and the disaggregated groups. So when you log on, when a principal logs on, they have the or a superintendent or a district leader, they have the option to be able to see all that information I just showed you with an icon or a number. The public can only see an icon. I didn't realize that until after I produced this for you and we went to that training. So if Al, you went on, you saw like a donut hole or a bigger donut hole, but there wasn't a number next to it.
Right.
What we can see is how close the number is to that next category. It's intriguing to me that they chose not to put that number out there.
Yeah.
And that is referred to as suppressed data. So there's a big old red banner when we log on saying, this is suppressed data, don't share this information. The principals all have their accounts. They've been in to kind of look at it. They're doing what we're doing, trying to make sense of it. It's a fairly complex algorithm. So for example, for this academic proficiency one, you can click on it and go in to see, well, what score did I get for English language arts? What score did I get for math? What score did I get for science? How are each one weighted against each other? If you're a school that didn't get science, then your math, it all adds up to 100%. So if you didn't have science, then your math and ELA way more. If you have a grad rate, then that gets added into it. If you don't have a grad rate, then those other numbers are bigger. So it's a very complicated algorithm I'm still trying to understand.
Crazy.
Spent about half a day with them on Monday trying to understand it. I appreciate the spirit of it, but I think it's going to take us a little while to kind of figure out how the numbers get produced.
Right.
So for example, a principal would see if they click the number, they would see the number like 3.17.
Yeah.
There is an appendices on page 137 of the Vermont ESSA plan, where our 4-digit scaled score for ELA in SBAC goes along a table, and you see the number 3.17. So you have to sort of do this reference check with each other.
Yeah, you need a decoder ring.
A little bit, yeah. Again, I appreciate the spirit of it. I like the fact that it's really speaking about holistic things. It's not just about test scores.
Yeah.
They are talking about inputs, not just outputs. They are tying it to the ed quality standards, which we said as a state we value.
Yeah.
Suppressed data. So that's that breakdown. You can start to see in this school, ELA is 28%, math is
You don't have
28%,
an
science
EQ.
is 2. But if you didn't give the science test, these numbers would be bigger. So still trying to wrap our heads around it a little bit.
Isn't that the weighting though?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a dynamic weighting
Yeah.
that will
The
change.
word. Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
statistic-led.
Which I didn't understand at first until I started looking at our schools and went, hey, so Essex Elementary School, what number did they get?
So you have
Which
the donut.
really calls into
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
the
No donut for that
efficacy
one.
of seeing
Donut
one
down
year
below.
versus
Yeah.
last year change when you have a dynamic weighting based upon.
Yep. Areas we did very well in. We are exceeding, still trying to understand what that means and what number that is. We are exceeding in graduation rates. We are doing actually quite well in English language arts, and some of our schools have received an exceeding around that one. Still trying to understand what that number looks like. English language learners, the growth rate at which they're learning, I was disappointed to see that it was listed as approaching. I'm still trying to figure out the algorithm that caused for that to happen, so we can figure out what to do with that. Our equity indexes across the state and in our district, not surprisingly, it reflects another way to say that we have achievement gaps. I'm sorry.
The college and career readiness, is that self-reported by the alumni?
No, this one would be ACT scores, SAT scores, which the state gets.
So if they don't take,
Right.
but then they still excel at college,
Yeah, so what was stated at the meeting was you should encourage your students to take these assessments because we
right,
wouldn't have
but
a
if they
data point on
don't,
it.
okay. So that's the only measurement is
For the
through,
post-secondary outcomes, so if
Yeah.
they have a certificate in the industry.
Like industry
or-
standard or go to college.
but that would be self-reported
Yeah.
because you don't
That
have
would
a
fit
means.
here.
No, that would be, no, we have that data if they have a post-secondary, right.
Yeah, I just think
Right
it's
through.
all, oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm still trying to understand these points right there, right?
Need to ask Greg about that.
Like CTE students, that would get in there,
Yep.
if they get a
If they
certificate.
Within-
The interesting thing too is the growth, I thought it was over 2 years, it turns out it's over 3 years. So this is 2017-18 data, which means, and they drill it down to only the students who are with us. So from 2015 to 2017, of the students who were with us, what was that growth like compared to other school districts' growth?
Wow, that's.
Which is awesome that they did it. It just takes us a while to dig into it right now to try to figure out what that is. So I was texting with one of the principals today, trying to help them understand it.
That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, the potential is there. I think keeping an eye on it, they're calling this phase 1, they'll see phase 2, 3, and I imagine several other phases as we get more data points.
Yeah.
Kim?
I'm just on the site now and realizing a pull down is under all student groups. You can
Yes.
look at free and reduced lunch or non-free and reduced lunch, male, female, ELL, non-ELL. So you
It's pretty
can
robust.
also look at it for all grades in our district, for
Yeah.
single subjects, all subjects. That's pretty interesting information to break down just those 4 circles for us.
Yes.
At least in immediate gratification and wondering, first indicators of where the challenges are within our marginalized
Right.
populations.
Right.
It's not within our Asian Americans, but it is definitely identified in some of these other subcategories.
Yeah, right there.
It just as a,
And the list goes on, oops, sorry, the list goes on.
yeah.
Wow.
And
And then
again, I
that's
have to
how they
assume,
define
back
it,
to Al's
right? Like-
question, if I touch on one of these and the number is so small that it would not reveal something, it would say that there's not enough information, or that there's less than.
Right. So what do you have
So you
to-
can do this for each of our schools, you can do it for districts, you can do it for your neighboring schools. You can do, the CTE is not in here, and I asked the
Remember,
question, will you be doing
it's-
tech centers, and there's no plan to include tech centers.
Remember, it's 17-18 data, it's not like the ones we just took. That's what's not
Right,
segregated.
that's the disconnect, is SPEC just came out with 19 scores, and these are 17, 18 scores.
Okay.
So this has a lot, we have a lot of learning to do here. That it was unfortunate it arrived on our doorstep in the first, day of in-service as we were trying to transport teachers out the door and principals, so we really haven't had time as a leadership team to get into it. As I said, I think there's some time devoted to it this summer. And it will grow over time. And that's your annual snapshot. Boy, the room just went quiet. Yes, Brendan.
So, one of the things that I find challenging as a board member, and I'm sure you do as administrators, is and I appreciate having all of this data presented to us, but I'm sitting here as a board member going, what does this add up to? Like, does all of it, and we're not supposed to count on just one data point. So how do I know, based on this data dump, and I use that in a loving way, how do I know whether or not we're meeting or progressing toward our goals?
That's the bottom line.
We're swimming in all this data, and I still don't know how we're doing. And so that's why, for me, there's actually a little bit of pull toward a dashboard like this that could end up becoming a public resource that our community goes to and says, what's going on?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's gonna take.
So I'm just sort of out loud saying that we've got all this data. I still don't know whether or not the data shows progress or not. And I also feel attracted to something like a dashboard that can tell us in a snapshot how we're doing.
And I don't know if that growth measure that you're talking about, is that the piece where eventually we would be seeing, I clicked off of it now, where it's the arrows?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
we
you
could
would,
see growth
year
over time
two,
or
we would start to see growth or not in those categories potentially as a continuous improvement.
I guess I'm just
for
wondering,
this.
as a board,
Right.
does this become our dashboard that we then help hold Beth accountable for?
I think,
Or is there something else?
I don't think you can vary too far from it because it's the intention of it to be highly public in comparison. I
Right.
think that this is, a 5 to 7 year endeavor.
yeah,
Right. So that, I think if we get that horizon, because you can see with dynamic weighting as they bring in the phys ed, that's gonna change everything. If something hasn't changed, it continues to evolve.
Right.
Plus, there's a huge portion that's on the climate survey, it's never been administered.
Right.
So there's a portion here that's just gonna take a while for it to come out, take a while for us to make sense of it.
I think if you can identify I guess I'll say it this way, the way you want to evaluate your data. So remember, go back to the slides for SBAC. Those were percentages of kids in certain categories, right? This is the degree to which individual students are growing. So this particular district might have, if it weren't suppressed, might have a stellar number for growth and might actually have a large number of students who were in the one category. But because they track the scale, what they're showing is the enormous amount of growth students have had. That's, the state of Vermont had said for years they wanted to move to a growth-based model. So I think when you determine that number, that matrix that you want, how do you want to measure it? Because if we just look at those tables and say, gosh, we've been 65% of a meeting for years, and why isn't that number moving? That's one way to measure it, and this is another way. Maybe there's ways you can do it both ways.
I was looking at one though, and it said, for one of the schools, it said declining, and I clicked on it, and it was like 0.025 or something. I'm like, really?
right,
Right.
right. That,
That's not declining, that's like flatlined.
no,
It is a shame the
But
complexity
public
of the
would see
data
it. They'll
is
see
so
that
hard to
the-
understand.
But the one thing that seems, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The thing that, as I'm clicking around, I'm appreciating is that 30,000 foot look dilutes a lot of it and calls into question the weighting and otherwise. But we can also click just on math and just on a grade or just on a building or just on a subgroup. we have the opportunity to be curious about the data in a different way than we have historically. And I think it's a really good start, I think, to, I don't think it has to be dissolved, or it will be useful in the next 5 years, each year over year, because we can drill down into it in ways we've not been able to. And if we can, so can our public. So we should think about the curiosities we would have and the support for growth and the investment that would be necessary, if it's a matter of investment, to identify those areas of need and to hear strategically what that investment request is, so we can ask of that for our community. So that's how I would imagine linking the data and the vision and the outcomes and the reporting and the request for money. That's the part that feels board-esque to me.
But I don't see this as being the only source of data, because I think our local assessment data is also very important. So I think we're struggling because as a new district, we know we have data from the two old districts, but we're starting over as a new district. And is that what we should see our present data as, is a starting point? Or should we be worried about what was happening before in individual districts? And I think that's tough. I think that's tough, and we're making some curriculum changes, particularly in math. And so I guess I've tried to be at peace with the fact that this is going to be frustrating for a little while longer. Are there questions on the annual snapshot? Okay, so one more, right?
This one's Erin's.
That's right. Amy, before you...
I'm not leaving, I'm gonna sit.
You're going to sit there first. Okay.
All right. Right point here. So, I think this is a nice transition point actually into the equity survey. One of the things that I noticed as we just had the conversation about the statewide snapshot is that it has an equity frame built in. And there is a nice alignment between our continuous improvement plan and thinking about what data, not only from an academic perspective, right, academic performance, but also the information contained within what was provided to you as the, Amy, is this in here as well, or is this just
I printed the slide.
the whole slideshow?
Keep going.
Backwards, I just wanna-
So one of the things, while Erin is finding it, what we noticed when Amy put in our continuous improvement plans, that because of this and some schools being identified with the equity supports, that the state was saying you need a whole page in our continuous improvement plan about equity. And we were like, our entire continuous improvement plan is about equity. And they were great.
Yeah.
So we were ahead of the game.
So, I mean, I do think that alignment is just so important to
It
note,
is.
and that dashboard will be really critical
Yes.
as we continue to consider the work forward in reference to equity. You all received the information that we did not receive the equity literacy grant, but we did build a quality plan around the conversation of equity literacy for the system that we'll be engaging in. And part of that plan was to administer the survey that was within the building equity book at the end. There was a survey for students and there was a survey for employees, all staff. We wanted to make sure to get at least the first benchmarking survey done this year so that we would have something to compare it to should we decide to continue forward. There's a couple of pieces I'd like to note before we get into the data. One is just a deep appreciation for everyone who took time at the end of the school year to complete these surveys. The one for faculty and staff, that was 95 questions, and the one for students, which was administered 6 through 12, was 65 questions. And so it was a deep ask of those folks who did that. We didn't get 100% participation from students or employees. I wasn't necessarily expecting that. I was hopeful for it, but understandably given the timing. I also just want to remind you before we move into this that this is perception data and it is from a non-validated tool. So that survey in the back of that text, to my knowledge, is not a validated tool for measurement, but it does give us a good perspective about the perceptions of the people who answered the survey. A couple of positive pieces that I've heard some feedback about the survey that seems valuable to share. One is the alignment with the continuous improvement plan. Another piece of feedback was like, these are really important questions to ask. Thank you for asking them. The appreciation of the focus on equity, and also I received some positive feedback that all employees were asked and offered an opportunity to complete the survey. Wasn't just teachers, it was everyone, non-instructional support staff, instructional support staff, and so there were several positive comments in that light. We did receive some negative feedback about the survey that it feels really important to share, especially just given some of the passion that came through around some of the concerns. One was the timing, and that we need to do this a little earlier, and so noted, and I think we knew that. We did speak with the VFE group, including some students, about whether we should go forward or not and how we should go forward, and we determined to go ahead knowing that it was going to press on people in reference to timing. There were some concerns about the design of the questions, feeling like they were leading, also feeling like some of the questions were really hard to answer. For example, for faculty, they were asked to answer questions that said, what do you think students would say about this? And they said, I can't intuit what students would say about this. And so there were some concerns there. There was a concern brought up that there was not a text box for comments for students. And in the initial entry into the survey, we said your voice is very important. We really want this information from you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and not necessarily feeling like it was a really high quality process for collecting student voice. And so Beth and I have talked about that. We're thinking about that, right? All of those pieces of feedback are really helpful. Also, the lack of demographic association with the results. So we had a conversation with some students about whether we should ask questions about race, whether we should ask questions about whether or not you're eligible for an IEP. And we all just came to agreement in that conversation that we didn't want to put students in a place where they were answering those kinds of questions with other kids in the room, that didn't feel very respectful to students, and so we did not ask those questions. And we also did not ask students to enter in an ID number, which means we cannot associate it with their demographic information. So while there's a downside to that, we just determined that it was most respectful not to ask students those kinds of questions in that environment, and so we can't necessarily do that with this data set. That said, it is collective perception of the students and the faculty and staff that completed it. We are just beginning to dive into this data. What I have for you tonight is a very high level highlights of it, both from the positive perspective, what are we doing well, and where are the areas that were sort of clearly popping out in need of growth, keeping in mind that there are 95 questions to analyze and 65 questions to analyze, and we have all of this data, and we need to think about how we're going to disaggregate this in a way that is helpful to us as a leadership team. And we should talk about this again, given that this survey was just completed last week. So again, this is very new data for you. So first up, maybe I should just do this over here. First up is just a review of the percentages of the grades students were in that completed, and you can see that there were 1,322 students who completed the survey, and that's just the percentages of the grades that they're in. And then as we start to get into positive highlights, there were two pieces that really came through that I thought were important to share with you all. One is that students agree that they are prepared to work hard to reach their dreams, which was great, and I was glad to see that 95.5% of students agree with that. One of the pieces of data that just made me feel grateful for all of those people who work in our schools every day with students is that 87.3% of our students agree that there's at least one adult in school who cares about, supports, and mentors them. And so I think that's something to be really proud of, that students feel that way when asked that question. I also know the importance of high expectations as a director of student support services and as someone who researches a lot about how to improve student performance. High expectations are a really critical feature of student improvement and growth. And 85.9% of students agree that teachers have high expectations for me and they believe in my abilities. John Hattie, who is a very prominent researcher in education, has found that the #1 correlator with student achievement is something called collective teacher efficacy, and that is the teacher's belief that they can impact student growth. And so from a student's perspective, they're feeling like their teachers believe in them, and that's something to be really proud of. Then also we know the importance of commitment, perseverance, and flexibility, and that they are encouraged to demonstrate those characteristics in challenging situations. That students agree that teachers and administrators want students to learn from good and bad choices that they make, and that students agree that they are encouraged to take on challenging classes, projects, and activities. That to some degree is connected to having high expectations for students. I think those two results are connected. So those are some of the positive highlights. Those are some of the highest percentages for positive attributes that came through. Do we want to stop at each slide and offer an opportunity for questions about the data, or would you prefer me to go through all of them first? Sure.
Go ahead. Like what is considered agree that that's, so wasn't it a range?
So
like
there was
1 to something,
there was
or I can't
1
remember.
through 6.
Okay.
You could strongly agree, agree or somewhat agree, and then you could somewhat disagree, or strongly disagree. And so there was no middle. That was another area that people were frustrated by, that they didn't have a middle choice, that they had to decide whether they fell on the agree side or the disagree side. We did that because of the importance of being able to analyze the data, and I totally understand how frustrating that might be. There also wasn't an I'm not sure, although no one was required to answer a question. So it wasn't, you could move forward and not respond to something if you really felt like you didn't want to.
So everything on the right side or whatever would be counted in the 90.5.
Yes, so it would be somewhat agree, or strongly agree, all counted as agree.
Yep.
And then you have the disagree side. And you can take these numbers and just put on the other side, that's the total number of people who were disagreeing. It's a total of 100% each time you see the numbers. Okay.
Let's go through the other piece of the student data and then pause.
So these are some areas that really came through in need of growth or areas for us to focus on. We've already talked about the bullying piece. But there's a large number of students who don't feel like school is helping them discover what life is all about, whatever that perception might be to a student. There are a number of students that agree that there are tensions in the school between students with different backgrounds and identities. And so that's something that really feels important to think carefully about. The bullying piece we've talked about a little bit, and feels like something that we need to continue to consider and think about. It's clear that students have a perception that bullying is a problem in their school. And so that data point came through clearly. 36.8% of students agree they know a student who's afraid to come to school. That felt pretty high. In reference to that data point, there's some YRBS data, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data that we can look at, and I haven't done this yet, but I'm curious about what that says compared to this data point to see if they triangulate. I think that's worth doing. And 57.1% of students agree that students from specific subgroups are treated differently than others when they misbehave. It goes back to the disaggregation of discipline data that we've talked a little bit about, and the importance of being able to do that and think through those issues. Keely gave a good example of gender differences, right? There's a conversation I have about race, students with disabilities. There's interesting research. I brought this up at the last meeting. We were talking about bullying, about students with disabilities having higher rates of being bullied than other groups of students, and so whether or not that bears out in some of this. As always, the data leads to more questions, but I do feel like this perception data it's pretty clear what people think when they answer these questions. Again, though, there was some concern that some of the questions were leading. You can read the survey easily in your building equity text if you're interested in knowing any particular result, right? And again, we'll be diving in more deeply and trying to figure out, are there some other areas also that people want to focus on? We need more eyes on it and more conversation about it. So those are the highlights from the equity survey for student data. Are there questions or comments about it? Keely?
I think you're right that correlating with other sources would be interesting for the no students one, just because of the way that one is phrased. Like if somebody set a fire in the library, then probably at least 85% of students would know someone who commits arson at school, even if there's only one student who set a fire in the library.
Right.
So
I wondered too about the impact of, like, I thought about the swatting incident that happened at Essex High School. There are some things that happen in schools that contribute to those numbers beyond, for example, I think sometimes we go to like, oh, the student is afraid of another student.
Right.
But I think your example is a good one to say, might not be about another student. It might be about other events. There's also research about the increase in anxiety and depression in the student population today that could be another conversation point associated with some of this information as well. Yeah.
Do any of these data points or questions ask the user or participant which school they're attending?
Yes.
They do.
They do. We disaggregated by grade and by school.
Okay.
We also asked for gender, but we gave a series of choices in gender that are much more expansive than we've historically provided around gender, and there was an option both for faculty and staff as well as for students not to provide a gender, to say I'd rather not share that information. So those are some ways that we can disaggregate. We're not completely limited in disaggregation. It's just that we can't look at what, for example, was in reference to historically marginalized populations in the statewide data system that you can disaggregate by. We won't be able to do that with this data set.
one last very quick question. I think you said there were 1,322 responses. What is that as a percentage of eligible people who could have filled it out? Is that like 70%?
We had 400 students missing from Essex High School. I think we had almost 100% at Westford. We ended up with 308 students at ADL, which is pretty close to the top. EMS, there were fewer students that completed it, so I'm not
But
sure
like, do we
the
know our
the
total 6 to 12 population?
Yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head. It would not be hard to get, though. I can definitely answer that question. I think we probably had somewhere between 600 and maybe around 600 kids who didn't take the survey. We haven't yet dove into why. I think a huge part of, a large number of them were seniors. So they were, keep in mind, we did this 2 weeks ago, right? So a fair number of seniors, and then we had a fair number of students at EMS who didn't participate. So, but I can get you a specific number. We can disaggregate it. And again, I just, for me, this year, there's a bit of a pass on that, just given the lateness and we're learning. And I think we can use it as a benchmark year, given the number of kids and the number of faculty and staff who took the survey. And we can work hard to make sure that the number of students and number of faculty and staff that complete this next year, if we decide to do it again, is higher than
We
it
also
is.
want to look at this and the questions that were asked with the state one, the climate one that will come out.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to
We've seen
survey,
what-
over-survey people.
Yeah.
So we want to look at that, but we
Yeah.
had that was coming out, and Dylan, Aaron, and Amy and I had the conversation, like, do we do this? And it was like, yes, we're going with this one.
Yeah.
But we do need to compare. We're intrigued by that.
And this has questions beyond climate. So it gets into questions, and you'll see it when we get into the teacher data, about how you feel about the physical spaces that you're in.
Yeah.
You know, my guess is maybe that's in the Vermont Climb Survey. My guess is that the physical integration part of the text that we read and the questions that were asked are not as present in the BT Climb. So, we will need to cross-reference and figure out whether or not we continue with the survey.
Other comments or questions?
For the teacher.
Well, I just have two things
Yes.
to say. It's pretty clear from these areas that we do have equity work to do with students. The other thing I'd be curious about is, what did students think school helping them discover what life is all about meant? I just, I can't,
Yeah.
I just love to survey a few students and see what were they thinking when they answered that
Survey
question.
That's a
Yeah.
benefit of using something that has been validated. So as we decided to jump into an unvalidated survey set of questions for some perception data, given the work we've done and its alignment to our continuous improvement plan, those are the kinds of issues that surface. That's the kind of question that wouldn't last through a validation process, for example. Yeah.
Clear enough. Kim?
A couple of things. My guess might be, though, that they would know it if they were experiencing it. They might not know how to define what it would be, but for those
Sure.
who maybe either did the internship class or have done capstones through their I bet they might have answered that affirmatively because it gave them exposure to something outside of the school walls. That would just be in thinking about that question. But I think to the extent that this information, whether we do the same survey again or we don't, we did it for a reason. So even though it's a singular set of data, I hope that we'll reference it where it is posing curiosities that you're exploring further so that people can see the value and the time they took to do it.
Absolutely.
And that despite the fact it's not longitudinal yet, that it may or may not be repeated, it was a starting point. It was a focus of the things we cared about this year or, have cared about in our vision, have followed through with in this year, and wanted to reveal both things that felt good and things that didn't feel good. So I would just encourage us to pull it out when it's the thing that's prompting the next thing
I
we're
do
looking at.
think we should use it at opening in service in August.
Yeah,
at some
I think there are a
point.
lot of
Give
ways
them-
we
yeah,
can use it that we haven't
absolutely.
yet explored. And there's a lot of ways to, I gave you highlights based on questions. These questions are chunked into the 5 areas of equity. And so we can take the questions and the data and turn them into sort of like, how are we doing in this area? How are we doing in that area? So there's a lot of power behind this data set in a way that I think we can do a good deal of work in a number of ways. And I know that that was why we spent the goodwill to ask for the information at this time of year, because we need it.
And I guess I'm just thinking sharing it in service is awesome because teachers will see their voice reflected. Helping students understand how they can see their voice reflected, or if it's chunked up into categories and we're going to then invite students to be part of further dive in each of those categories, maybe students can say, that one's really curious to me and I want to be part of that. So I would love for us to find the way that it would be that students can see their results
Yeah, for sure.
and their voice.
So there's just one more comment I wanted to make, and that is, if you could go back a page, Erin, I was surprised that 86% of students said teachers have high expectations for me. They believe in me and my abilities. And my surprise came from doing the interviews with the students who applied to be student reps. To a person, they said a problem they would like to work on at the high school was that they felt many teachers didn't make strong enough connections with students, and they felt they did much better in classes where they felt connected to a teacher. So that was a disconnect for me. Now, granted, that was 5 students or something, but it was just interesting.
Yeah, I think that the closer we get to valid whole population data, the better we'll be able to make sense of those smaller experiences. Stories are so important. We know that. Individual stories. And so too is it important that an individual story does not speak for all students. And so, how do you make sense of both of those having great value as we think about, forward movement in those areas? Agreed.
Do we ever, and data people will know better than I, somewhat agree and somewhat disagree, may have less distance from one another than those who agree and strongly agree.
Oh, very,
So
very
I'm just
much
wondering
so.
if it
Yeah.
parses out in 3s versus 2s. So this is giving us 2s.
Yeah.
So you
You go on
somewhat
this
agree.
side or this side.
Yeah,
Yep.
and so it'd be curious to think about the data for those that agree and strongly agree, those who are in the middle, who both somewhat agreed, and if you somewhat agree, you somewhat disagree. So, and then
I think
those that
That's another
are
way
disagree.
to parse it out.
and
it's just like
strongly
the
disagree.
SBAC, why it's important to look at one number, but then look at the disaggregation of that, and then
Yeah.
also look at the weighting of where that, you can't do it in this type of survey, but, so we wanna look at it all. I mean, in the 2 weeks or so that we've had this data,
Right.
we've really just kind of gone
week.
off
Yeah.
the top part.
Yeah.
But I think it is a year's worth of work to go in and make sense of it and show value. And I mean, I would hope that this survey results show up in our budgeting.
We also have the ability to push this into statistical software to make statistical meaning of the data, should we choose to do so. So we'll talk about all of that, and again, these are the highlights that sort of came forward as you look through the data, as opposed to any kind of statistical significance or, and if I did that process where we did a solid statistical review, would I choose these as the highlights? I can't answer that question right now, we'd have to do it first, but it did seem important. It's new, we're just starting to look at it, and it really did, I think, show some important pieces of information about what students thought about their experiences in our schools and will be important into the future. Yeah.
So
On to-
let's move to
Okay.
employee.
So, this is a graph that just shows the percentage and the numbers of folks who completed at the time. There may be more now, so I took this out at the point that we developed the survey, but teachers were still wrapping up and employees were still wrapping up. So we may see more information come forward over time on this. I did one slide with sort of highlights and areas of growth. So, you know, I was heartened by almost 100% of employees agreeing that teachers and staff show they care about students. That was our highest area across the survey. That 86.2% of our faculty and staff agree they're proud of our school facilities and resources. So that is something that I think is important to share with you as a board. And that 67.8% of employees agree students are being prepared to function as members of a diverse society. This did not strike me as a really great score, but it felt like a really important question. And so I included that data point. The employees agree, 66.9 agree that we reach out to families from different backgrounds to ensure they feel welcome and valued. This for me was kind of a low score in this area. I felt like that indicated some area in need of growth. Employees agree we are culturally competent staff. That means 40% feel like we're not, if you are in the binary on this survey.
Right.
53% of employees agree social emotional needs of students are adequately supported. That means 47% of employees feel like they're not. You all have made an incredible investment in this area, and we focus leadership in this area. It might be a good one to be able to watch over time to see if that changes given investment. It's a good point of reference. And then the point that we've talked about, there's strong agreement between staff and faculty with the students in reference to bullying being a concern in our schools. And so that perception data came through very, very clearly in the survey and is offering opportunities, some that Beth has talked about and some yet to be discussed, because we need to talk with this data point with the leadership team as a whole. They haven't had the opportunity to have the conversation. Several people are on vacation. We're, again, just beginning to see these results come through. So that was the slide that I prepared for you in reference to staff and faculty.
I think this has been said before, but the one about reaching out to families from different backgrounds, it'd be useful to reach out to families with that question, because their perception probably is more relevant.
It's worth noting that the student data, which exists on the opposite side of this, so there's a matching student data point, it didn't come into as much a concern as some of the other areas, but it was not a super strong. The reason you didn't see it in one of the really high scores is because students also feel like this is an area of issue in their results too.
Even there, there isn't always communication between students and their families about their relationship with school.
Yeah.
Which is part of the communication problem between home and school.
Yeah.
But I think even if things are working well, the parent and student might not be talking about it.
Right.
So, but yeah, that one, and I'm sure there are other questions that would be useful to hear from families, and you can ask families for demographic information.
Yes.
Because everybody's over 18 and they're not sitting there in a classroom.
That's right. That's an important point, Keely. Thank you for bringing that up. I had meant to mention it earlier, is that every group that I've talked to about this survey agrees that it is important to ask parents too, parents and families, guardians, about these issues, and there was not a survey for families, guardians, and parents at the back of the book that we read and where we got the survey. And so we would need to design it. And I think it's worth talking about a design with the author for a parent complement to a family complement to this set of surveys and survey families as well. And so if we decide to stay with the survey, the author of this survey is coming to see us in November for social emotional learning work, that we might be able to approach him to see if he'd be willing to work with us to develop a parent complement, a family complement to add to it. So we have 3 surveys instead of just 2.
Kim, and then Al.
I'm just thinking about this in the context of the state climate survey. I think I'm recalling from the state board meeting
last week that they are in the final stages of the contracting process, I think, perhaps. And I'm guessing schools around the state do something around this occasionally. And I'm wondering if somehow sharing up some of the work we're doing in this area might be beneficial if we want this newly created statewide survey to have an equity lens, which I would imagine, given the talk and the focus, would be the case. It might be worth sharing our body of work as something they might look to consider.
We could. I think that the survey that Vermont Climb is using is a pre-designed survey from another company, possibly. I could be wrong.
Right, I do think they're
I'm not
contracting
sure.
with someone, but I don't know whether or not it's like an off-the-shelf or...
I think it's a validated survey that has been developed, and it focuses, I believe, on climate, but it is worth sharing. I think it's worth sharing to say, hey, we've completed a survey around with an equity focus. It incorporates a lot of climate data into it.
And these 5 domains.
These
and,
domains.
I mean, they're talking about...
I think they're pretty far down the road.
Capital
though.
improvements. The state level is touching on all of these areas in education. So I think it's an interesting share.
Let's go. We're happy to go talk to the agency about it.
So we have a couple more minutes. I've got Al, and then I'll
Just a quick
go for
observation.
a last couple questions.
Just a quick observation. The bullying comment in both student and teacher leads me to wonder if some of the student responses regarding tensions, afraid to come to school, are related.
Could be.
Yeah.
Certainly possible.
Yep. Other comments or questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy, it seems important to say thank you for your years of work at CCSU and your work with the Essex Westford School District. I know we'll miss you. And we certainly wish you all the best in Hawaii.
Thank you very much
Thank you, Amy.
for all the work that you do as well. You're not gonna come to the retreat at my house, though.
Thank you.
Just walk up the yard and find it.
You'll see that come through. Trip to Hawaii. Bye, Amy, thank you. Erin, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome to stay, I'm sure.
I think I'll head tonight.
Okay.
I stayed last time.
Okay, so should I just ask for questions on the transportation
Sure. I'm
status
trying to bring mine
update
up.
since we received all the information? So what questions do folks have? Keely?
My question would just be, Sarah, what we can expect from the first meeting in August. Hopefully at that point, we'll have more clarity on what drivers will be reporting to work at the beginning of September. But with how kind of interlocked the currently designed transportation plan is, there's less ability to separate off chunks if we end up more than 1 or 2 drivers short. So I hope that when we see you guys in early August, if it looks like we are significantly short on drivers, you'll be bringing us some sort of a contingency plan that serves the youngest students first. I know Pat and Todd, my other Junction residents with young students aren't here, but I mean, it's been a few years where it's like, well, we almost have enough, so we'll wait on the Junction again. And I don't think we're gonna be able to hear that again.
Yeah, our intent would be that if we see any variance from our plan, we'll let you know that as soon as we do, and wouldn't wait for a meeting in our first meeting in August. So you'll know what it is, and we'll continue to provide the board updates as we have them, and probably will issue those to the community like we've been doing. You know, my only statement is that there's been very little inside of our control that's resulted in the last 2 years. So I think we've hashed that out, and I think our detractors in the issue recognize that, you know, it comes down to personal decisions that we don't necessarily control. We have good information coming back from Mountain Transit that their drivers look in place. We had a successful negotiation today with CCR for Westford, and that looks like it's going to be in place and that they have the drivers. And that we had a jobs fair for the first time in history, and we attracted 40 people, and we look like we have about 20 candidates for various jobs within operations. That was just operations focus. For the first time ever, we have a fleet of people that are going to be bus aides and monitors. We have a plan for higher touch traffic and traffic calming and parking lot management that's going to be in effect. It's an all hands on deck kind of approach going into the beginning of the year. So I think we're approaching this, and right now signals seem to be good. If I have any doubt, I'll make sure that you know it first. And there's a part of it that I think it goes without saying. I can't stop if there's 7 people that show up at their employer and say, I don't want to work for you anymore. I have no way of forcing those people to continue to be employed, and we would have shortages. And of course, we would come up with contingency plans for our youngest and most vulnerable. So, you know, we have also talked as a board that there are certain places where vulnerability is not exclusive to age.
Okay.
And that's not to hedge. I mean, there's nobody that wants to bring busing to Essex Junction more than Jamie Smith and the dispatcher and your administration. It's just that there just needs to be some representation of, like, there's an element of this that would be scrambling if we had 7 second grade teachers come into us and say, I'm leaving.
Other questions on the transportation update? Kim?
I was just gonna say that there is greater comfort in the notion that the plan that's in place relies on the people that we have currently employed, versus previous years where it was the expectation we would be able to have drivers in place that we didn't currently. So that.
But we didn't even retain over this last year.
So introducing almost 100% of our fleet having bus aides in afternoon runs has been mentioned as a key retention tool by current employees. Feeling like they've been listened to, they're being respected, and they're being supported. So that's you know, so multiple angles to retention is a key part of our recruitment strategy.
They can keep their eyes on the road.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've also begun to train crossing guards so that they will assist buses in pulling out of roads and other places so that it can speed up their travel. So we're working much more as a team towards this transport than I think the history of transportation has been in the past.
Great. I have a question. Are we going to reinstate parking fees at the high school?
There's no plan to. Wasn't budgeted. Parking fees was used, it was a $12,000 revenue item in a, in a
Yeah, we
80.
should try to limit the number of people
Right.
who drove, so it isn't as necessary now that
It
the
was
school
imperative, right.
population
It was
is
imperative when
smaller.
we had 1,600 students and 400 tech students, as well as the staff at that time. So it was done to regulate the amount of cars on it. When we opened it up fully last year, we,
Wasn't a problem.
yeah.
Great, okay,
That might change again if we see student populations increase and to
right.
go. But we
Well,
don't anticipate any
I-
temporary parking lots or other elements. We're going to continue to be pretty present in the first 10 days of school with trying to set a tone for parking lot behavior.
Good. I thought it was important to ask for the
Yep.
viewing audience as much as for ourselves, Keely.
I mean, there are scientific reasons to encourage people not to drive, like
Right,
help the
climate.
environment and
Right.
teen drivers early in the morning tend to be in more accidents than
Yeah.
the average person, but that can be a discussion for once we have viable options for the.
I was gonna say,
healthy
I think the
environment.
opt-out is a
Yeah.
preferable
I
option.
mean, the more we can do to encourage carpools, like we should always be looking into ways to encourage carpools.
That's true.
And for the purpose of the public as well, I was just looking at the sort of Touch a Bus or Village Getting to Know busing being scheduled for July now, right? I'm just thinking of some of the highlights that are in our report that might be which will be on the website, I'm
Right.
sure, but.
So those are
just-
scheduled August events that will
Yeah.
we'll be starting to publicize in July. The entire EJ leadership team, the principals are all meeting with Jamie tomorrow to kind of start the various activities. And there's a lot of work that some of the schools need to do through the PBIS lens, work on bus behavior, bus responsibilities. So that there's a continuity. That's one of the things. Jamie attended all the responsive classroom training, so that we work in the same kind of vocabulary. And all the bus aides, the majority of the bus aides are currently employed para-educators, and we're getting them so that they're coming from the schools that those are then serving. So it's not random. They'll come on actually with relationship, and they'll also come on with some knowledge of what just transpired during the day.
That's great.
We also think that the K-12 buses present some opportunities for older kids to be some models and to provide some of that.
And then the other
Okay.
date that's probably important is August 10th, that you indicate that routes and stops and
Yep.
details will be made available. And I imagine if that date were to change, you would
Yes.
let us in the public know.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, testing updates, governance.
So the team meets on Thursday, and at our last meeting, we continued a discussion about the various models that we are investigating. We also, each of us had divvied up a responsibility to watch some other school boards in action through their videos, and shared some examples of what we thought were either good, bad, or indifferent examples of governance in action. And so this Thursday, we're tackling sort of a survey of the different models, which Keely has been working on. And then we're also going to start narrowing down a list of folks to bring as a speaker panel for the August retreat. So those are our next action items for Thursday.
Great. Questions? Al?
It would be nice if the speaker panel could also demonstrate through the school's student achievement that a specific approach is more effective, proves more effective than one other.
Certainly would be a good line of questioning, I think,
In terms of outcomes.
in terms of the discussion, yeah. So we envision inviting, superintendents as well as board members of schools or districts where we feel we have something to learn, and also possibly some other outside experts. So that'd be an interesting line of discussion.
Yeah, because that's what we're looking for, is the bottom line.
Right.
Thank you.
Other questions for Brenda? Okay. Communication and engagement. You're the only one here. You may not be prepared.
I think, okay, what did we talk about when we last met? I think we were still looking at the information from the,
Community engagement.
yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't prepared to present
That's
tonight because
okay.
I forgot that I would be the only one here. So if you give me a sec, I will pull up our minutes and then I will remember what we did.
Okay. Well, why don't we,
You can come back to me in 1 minute.
right, let's move on to local and statewide updates then. Brian, do we have any tax rate information?
I haven't, there's been a lot of things coming at us in the last couple of weeks with regards to that. I haven't seen anything come across directly. I mean, it's been all calculated. I mean, they usually, I think they're statutorily required to send it out before the 1st of July.
Right. So will you share that with us and maybe at the same time share or remind us what the information was that we had put out to the public, so we can see what it is compared to what we put out at the time of the budget vote. Okay.
Only 3 of the major levers was changed since we went to our budget vote.
Right.
Only three.
Only 3. How
And
many
they may not
levers
change
are
like it
there?
up, down.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
But it could be people hear only one of them, like this statewide increase, not realizing our increase in student count.
Right.
Like they
Right.
might anticipate something worse.
Right,
Yep.
yeah, because our student count
Helped offset.
changed dramatically upward, which will be helpful.
Yeah.
Versus the number we were having to use at the time of the budget. Kim?
I don't, just, I think of
Act
note.
46.
Yeah. They dismissed the case.
The judge has dismissed all the cases.
Yeah.
One more court to go.
And several of them,
Are gonna appeal.
Stowe and Elmore have decided not to appeal.
But
But
somebody
the
is.
other, I think it's 2 cases,
Yeah.
are going to the Supreme, likely to go to the Supreme Court.
Yes, both the State Board of Ed and the VSBA are in a renewing their strategic plan cycle. So those have been very interesting conversations to make sure previous plans reflect current focuses. And we worked on those at the VSBA retreat and the State Board of Ed meeting last week. It was interesting, being as new as I am to the State Board of Ed, to be part of the conversations around understanding the role really of the State Board of Ed in the absence of oversight of the agency. And I really was caused to think about it in who is overseeing the broader outcomes for students in our state. And if we're not, in the same way that this dashboard has come out for us as local boards to be looking at this data, I would like to see that part of the strategic work of the State Board of Ed is to look at it statewide, because initiatives come into place, legislation comes into place to serve purposes of equity and outcomes for students. And reports may be produced, but if it just seems as though it would be beneficial to see the vision and desirable outcomes be matched with some monitoring of that. So that was among the conversation that was happening, not because it's an oversight of the Secretary of Education, but rather because if the State Board of Ed oversees education, statewide education policy, and isn't monitoring for outcomes towards that policy, it feels like there's not that feedback loop that should happen. So I am hopeful that that helped anchor the conversation, honestly, because there are people from various historic backgrounds who were in various positions and places different from their State Board of Ed role at times where the agency became a secretary versus a commissioner or director, whatever it was before. And so historical perspective and understanding where the State Board of Ed fits was a very interesting conversation, and it evolved to have a little more of an anchor as we wrap that conversation up. I hope it will move towards that. We don't have our retreat till September, but that is a big body of work, I think, coming. So I don't think it'll mean anything bigger or more, but I imagine it for local districts. I just imagine it to provide good modeling for how the state is using data so that districts, and we're having those conversations, but that is certainly not necessarily the norm across the state, especially with unification, being able to look at those disaggregated groups where at a district level now, the N is no longer something you can't look at. It's probably one of the most impactful things that have happened with Act 46 mergers is you can't say you can't look at it anymore because you probably can. So that was, I appreciated those conversations. I'll keep you posted.
Great.
And
questions? Okay, Keely, you ready?
Yeah, so I realized why I don't remember anything, which is I brought my 2-year-old to that meeting.
You have that in the minutes?
I was not taking the minutes. I'm sure you can all look them up somewhere. Probably Pat took them. But we were continuing to talk about reporting out from the May engagement, kind of what themes were identified and how we can share that information with the community, and also kind of how we can use that qualitative data to inform us as we're looking at all the different engagements that people have talked about scheduling for September and October, because there's various meetings that are being planned by various groups on various topics, and rather than adding another one to look at more stages of the equity framework, can we combine that with like what work we're going to have to be doing for whatever governance model we're adopting, stuff like that. But I think there was more insightful conversation that has completely left my brain.
Okay, well, we'll get another update in August, perhaps. Okay, so now's the moment where we go around and talk about what we valued or appreciated or were challenged by at the meeting. One thing per person.
I'll start.
Okay.
I was challenged tonight by the fact that we are swimming in data, but as a board member, I still don't know quite how to interpret it.
Kaylee?
I appreciated getting a broader spectrum of data to start thinking about.
Laura?
There's a lot going on. I think I was challenged a little bit by the way that some of the things were phrased, especially in like the equity survey and in like the presentation, how the like the employee highlights also had like employee growth or like ways that employees think that it could grow, but it was still put under data highlights. And I just think that that kind of comes into the whole being able to admit that there are issues in the school. And so that was a challenge for me, if that kind of makes sense, I guess, if I explain that right.
Just because she put them on one slide.
Yeah.
So she separated the student into highlights of sort of positives and highlights of challenges. And she didn't do the same thing with the employee data. You had to sort of
Yeah, you have to
figure
think
that
about
out
which
for
was.
yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciated the sharing of the survey results, because that brought some awareness of some lingering issues, or not lingering, but issues that need attention.
Okay, well, I appreciate the fact that from the student data and the other data that we have in-house and our local data, that we do have enough resource and information to start thinking about how the board wants to measure learning and to start tracking various pieces of information at the board level in order to understand, really understand what's driving the needs of the school. Whether we can get there this year, I'm not sure, but I think the pieces are falling in place where some answers seem like they're way out or they're being delayed, but really we have everything at our disposal to make that happen.
I was grateful for the look, even if it was more surface than it might be as we break it down later. A look at data around student outcomes and around our equity lens as a start to a conversation to start answering the question I think that Brendan raised. And just one other gratitude for having met Tilly and Laura and Grace. I guess it was 2 weeks ago now for coffee, and I got to meet our new student board member and hear how we would like to work on that moving forward. So, great. Thank you.
I really appreciate this board's focus on student learning for all through an equity lens.
So just to be a little different, I appreciate Kim and Andre and Brendan and Beth and Deb Anderson for helping us successfully complete the negotiations of a teacher's contract in a non-adversarial way.
I appreciate Erin and Amy putting the data together and the many conversations we had about the data and me being okay without the answer. You know, having Amy just be on TV saying, I don't have the answers yet. And that takes a lot to get up there and do that, because of course we want all the answers and we don't have them yet. And it's all new. Yeah, to take that risk, I should say.
Okay, thank you. So our next board meeting is on August 6th. Does anybody have something for the agenda that is beyond what would be in our calendar mapping? Okay. Then communication to the community, what?
Do we need to, like, have any sort of action item to, like, invite people? If we're planning stuff for the board retreat, do we need to have a discussion of the board retreat on the agenda in order to plan the board retreat? Or would that just be in the agenda planning section?
So, well, that's a good question. We have a date for agenda planning, for the agenda planning group to plan the retreat. But it would be a good idea to ask for board input at the meeting on the 6th, because I think that planning meeting is on the 16th. So
Is the retreat on the 29th?
yes. It is. Okay, and our messages to the community, I think you probably want to say something about the contract. You definitely want to talk about the data that we looked at and perhaps a couple of the key dates in the transportation update, particularly when folks can expect to get bus routes and so forth. Anything else?
For the data, is it something that we typically would put links to?
Yeah.
Like we would just say these data categories were
Yes,
shared?
and it's on the website, the SDOC data and some of the
presentation.
graphs that were there are on our website.
Is the full presentation or will it
Yeah, the
be?
presentation can be there as well, but you can go and dig more, and the link to the accountability to the Snapchat, to the annual snapshot is there. It's not Snapchat.
Google eyes.
Okay.
Oh, can we put a pitch for mentor volunteers? Maybe? Or, I know that Ben does that as well, but, yeah. We don't have to, but,
Yeah, let's have Ben do that.
yeah, he does.
Okay. Anything else? All right, we are adjourned.